All right, so let's dive into this Kristi Noem situation. President-elect Trump's pick for Homeland Security. We've got a whole stack of articles here, and it's definitely got people talking.
Yeah, it's really it's interesting because it's not just about Noma herself, you know? It kind of gives us a hint about where the new administration might be going, especially when it comes to immigration.
Right, and I think a lot of people are already familiar with Noem from her time during the pandemic. South Dakota governor, she's in her second term now. She became pretty well known for her stance against those COVID-19 mandates. But now it's Homeland Security, a department with a huge reach, a lot of influence.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do here is go beyond just like reporting the news, right? We want to understand why this appointment matters, what the potential impact could be, what it says about the bigger picture,
Yeah,
the political strategy at play.
absolutely, Andrew. I think one of the things that jumps out from a lot of these articles is this focus on immigration. A lot of sources are pointing to Noem's selection as a sign that Trump is doubling down on those hardline immigration policies that we saw before.
Yeah, and you know what that means. We could be looking at a return to policies like zero tolerance from Trump's first term. Remember the family separations at the border? That's what we're talking about. And it could have really serious consequences for families that are trying to seek asylum here.
And it's not just Noem either, right?
Yeah.
We've got other appointments like Tom Homan coming in as border czar.
Yeah.
And he's known for that, tough stance on immigration enforcement. And then, of course, there's Stephen Miller, who is a key player in shaping those Trump immigration policies. In the first term, he's back as White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy.
Yeah.
What do you make of all of that?
Well, I mean, it's a plus here. It seems pretty clear that this administration is making immigration a top priority. Homan's role suggests that they want to see some quick action in the border, possibly on a very large scale. And with Miller coming back into a position of influence, it seems like we might see a continuation of the previous administration's approach to immigration.
So where does that leave Noem at the helm of Homeland Security?
I think it means that immigration is going to be front and center for her. She'll be overseeing agencies like Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And those agencies have a lot of power when it comes to shaping how immigration policies are actually put into practice.
And, we should probably point out that Homeland Security isn't just about immigration, right? It's a massive department. Border security, disaster response, even the Secret Service. It all falls under that umbrella. And let's not forget that $60 billion budget.
Right. It's a huge department with a lot of responsibilities. But I think it's safe to say that with this administration, immigration enforcement is going to be a defining part of Noem's time as secretary.
And, one of the things that we've seen from Noem that might give us a little bit of insight into her leadership style is how she handled the COVID-19 pandemic. That resistance to mask mandates kind of suggests preference for limited government intervention, right? How do you think that might translate to the complexities of something like Homeland Security?
That's a good question. It makes you wonder how her approach might differ across the various parts of the department. Will she be hands-off in some areas, but more assertive in others, like immigration? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And speaking of, strong leadership, it reminds me of this other aspect of Noem's past that's been getting a lot of attention, her history with tribal relations in South Dakota.
What do you mean the roof, the incident in 2024? When she made those claims about drug cartels infiltrating the South Dakota tribes, those claims were disputed pretty heavily. And she ended up being banned from all 9 tribal lands in the state.
Yeah, exactly. And it just makes you wonder how she might handle tribal relations on a national level, especially given that Homeland Security plays such a big role in border security and cross-border issues.
Yeah, tribal sovereignty and the whole issue of cross-border crime, those are already really sensitive topics.
Yeah.
Noem's experience in South Dakota could definitely have an impact on how she approaches these things on a national level.
So we've got this push for stricter immigration policies, likely driven by the administration's agenda. But then we also have these pre-existing tensions with tribal nations, which could complicate things even further, especially when it comes to border security.
Right, and if you connect that to the bigger picture, it suggests that there could be some conflict within the administration itself, how Noem balances those competing priorities, the demands from the Trump administration, and the complexities of tribal relations. That's going to be something to watch closely.
So we've talked about Noem's appointment, the focus on immigration, her background, some of the potential flashpoints. But what does it all actually mean for the Department of Homeland Security? What kind of changes might we actually see?
So that's the million-dollar question, and that's exactly what we're going to be exploring as we continue this deep dive. It's helpful sort of zoom out for a second and think about the Department of Homeland Security itself. This is a massive organization,
Yeah.
created after 9/11. And it has this incredibly broad and complex mandate.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the headlines
Yeah.
and kind of forget just how much this department actually covers. Can you maybe paint a picture for us? Like, what exactly falls under that Homeland Security umbrella?
Well, imagine it like this. You've got this giant safety net protecting the nation from all kinds of threats. We're talking about preventing terrorism, securing our borders, managing cybersecurity, responding to natural disasters, even safeguarding our election infrastructure. It's really... Homeland Security touches almost every aspect of national security these days, and it plays a huge role in our resilience as a country.
Wow, that's a lot to handle. And now you've got Kristi Noem potentially stepping into that leadership role. What kind of challenges do you think she's going to face, especially in this current political climate?
Well, I think the first hurdle is just managing such a diverse and sprawling department. Trying to allocate resources effectively, prioritizing competing demands. Within this complex bureaucratic structure, it's not easy. It's a constant balancing act.
And then on top of that, you've got the pressure cooker of politics. We've talked about immigration, but what are some other hot button issues that she's going to have to deal with?
Cybersecurity threats are a big one. They're constantly evolving, and Homeland Security plays a crucial role in protecting our critical infrastructure from those attacks. Then you've got the ongoing threat of terrorism, both domestic and international, which requires constant vigilance and close collaboration with intelligence agencies. And of course, we can't forget about natural disasters, which seem to be becoming more frequent and more intense because of climate change. The department's role in disaster preparedness and response is more critical than ever.
It sounds like it's a high-stakes job with no shortage of challenges. And then you layer on top of that Noem's own background and her potential biases. We talked about her stance on those COVID-19 mandates, her history with tribal relations in South Dakota. How do you think those factors might influence her approach to leading Homeland Security?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember her preference for limited government intervention during the pandemic. That could suggest a more hands-off approach to certain areas within Homeland Security. But then again, her hardline stance on issues like border security might lead to a more assertive and potentially controversial approach in those areas.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag then. And that tribal relations issue is particularly thorny.
Yeah.
Those past conflicts with tribal nations in South Dakota, they raise some serious concerns about how she'll handle issues of tribal sovereignty and cross-border cooperation on a national scale. Building trust and maintaining those relationships is crucial.
Absolutely. Homeland Security has a really significant role to play in working with tribal nations, especially when it comes to border security and law enforcement. Noem's ability to navigate those complex relationships and build bridges is going to be a major factor in her success.
So we've got a department facing a mountain of challenges: terrorism, cybersecurity, natural disasters, immigration. And we have Kristi Noem, a figure with a mixed record and some potential baggage, stepping into this leadership role. What are the potential consequences here? What should we be watching for as her tenure unfolds?
I think there are several key areas to keep an eye on. First, how will she prioritize the department's vast responsibilities? Will she lean heavily on immigration enforcement, as the administration seems to be signaling? Or will she try to strike a more balanced approach?
Right, and how will her leadership style and her personal beliefs shape her decision-making? Will she favor a more hands-off, limited government approach? Or are we going to see a more assertive and potentially controversial style of leadership?
And then there's the big question of how she'll navigate the political landscape. Will she be able to work effectively with Congress to secure funding and support for the department's initiatives? And can she resist political pressure and maintain the department's independence and integrity?
Those are all important questions. And of course, we can't forget about the potential impact on the people and communities most directly affected by Homeland Security policies. How will her approach to immigration enforcement affect families and businesses? How will her decisions regarding disaster preparedness and response impact those in vulnerable areas?
These are all critical questions that we'll be grappling with as Noem's time as secretary unfolds. It's a complex and ever-changing landscape, and her actions will have ripple effects far and wide.
So where do we go from here? How can we make sense of all this information and get a handle on what might lie ahead? So we've covered a lot in this deep dive. Noem's appointment, the focus on immigration, her background, and all those challenges facing Homeland Security. Now, what about the ripple effects? What could actually happen?
Right, and it's important to remember that Homeland Security doesn't operate in a vacuum. Noem's leadership is going to have consequences that reach well beyond the department itself. It could impact our relationships with other countries, domestic policy here at home. It's all connected.
Okay, so let's get specific. We've talked about immigration in general terms, but what kind of concrete policy changes might we actually see under her leadership?
Well, if we look at her alignment with Trump's stance on immigration, it's likely we'll see a renewed emphasis on border security. That could mean increased funding for physical barriers, surveillance technology, more personnel at the border.
And what about deportation efforts? That was a big issue during Trump's first term.
Yeah, there's a strong possibility we'll see a more aggressive approach there, maybe targeting a wider range of individuals, including people with minor offenses, or even those who have been living in the U.S. for a long time. And that would have huge social and economic implications for communities across the country.
And what about legal immigration? Could there be changes to visa programs, asylum policies, pathways to citizenship?
Oh, absolutely. That's all on the table. The Trump administration has been pretty clear about wanting to limit legal immigration. They argue that it strains resources, takes away American jobs. So we might see attempts to restrict family-based immigration, reduce the number of refugees allowed in, or make it harder for skilled workers to get visas.
This is pretty heavy stuff. It really feels like Noem's appointment could be a turning point, not just for Homeland Security, but for the whole country.
And we can't forget about the political battle ahead. Her confirmation hearings are likely to be pretty contentious. You'll have Democrats pushing back against her stance on immigration and her past actions.
Yeah, and how do you think her leadership will impact the dynamics within the Trump administration itself? Could there be clashes with other cabinet members or advisors who have different priorities?
Oh, I think that's definitely a possibility. There could be conflict with those who favor a more moderate approach to immigration or who prioritize other aspects of Homeland Security, like counterterrorism or cybersecurity. Her ability to navigate those internal power struggles is going to be crucial. And most importantly, I hope our listeners will be inspired to stay informed, to ask tough questions, to make their voices heard. The decisions made by our leaders will impact all of our lives. And it's up to us to hold them accountable, to make sure those decisions reflect our values.
And as always, we like to leave our listeners with something to think about. What kind of America do we want to build? What role do we want Homeland Security to play in our future? How can we ensure that our leaders' policies and actions reflect the best of who we are as a nation?
Those are great questions, and I really encourage everyone to continue this deep dive on their own, explore these issues, do some research, have those tough conversations with each other.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Kristi Noem and the future of Homeland Security. It's a complex and constantly evolving landscape, and we'll be here to explore it with you. Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.